The world watched as history seemed to unfold in real time. Libya was declared free. Another dictator had fallen. Another nation, where we were told, had been liberated. It was hailed as a victory for democracy. Global leaders celebrated the moment. They spoke of a new beginning, a future where Libyans would build a nation that was inclusive, stable, and democratic. A country that would stand in direct contrast to the rule of Muammar Gaddafi. That was the promise, but here's the reality. More than a decade later, Libya is not a thriving democracy. It's not even a functioning state. Instead, it has become fragmented, torn apart by rival militias, plagued by instability, and infiltrated by foreign fighters. Reports of a migrant slave market have resurfaced, and the country now looks nothing like the vision that was once sold to the world. So what went wrong? This is the story of how the intervention led by the United States and its NATO allies reshaped Libya's future, and how decisions made at the highest level, including under Barack Obama, set off a chain of reaction that the country is still struggling to contain. Because what happened in Libya didn't stay in Libya. The collapse of the state created ripple effects across the region, fueling insecurity, enabling trafficking networks, and destabilizing parts of the Sahel. To understand how it all fell apart, we have to go back. Long before modern Libya existed, the land was divided into three main regions: Tripolitania in the west, Cyrenaica in the east, and Fezzan in the south. For centuries, these regions were loosely governed by the Ottoman Empire. Libya's importance wasn't accidental. Its position along the Mediterranean made it a key hub in North African trade routes, a gateway between Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. But the Ottomans wouldn't be the last to control it. The role would soon be taken by a rising European power, Italy. In 1911, Italy invaded Libya, claiming it as part of its imperial ambition, a new Rome. It didn't matter that the land was already inhabited. Over the following decades, Libya was transformed into a settler colony. Indigenous populations were displaced to make way for Italian settlers. But the people resisted. And the center of that resistance was a man whose name would echo through history, Omar Mukhtar. Known as the Lion of the Desert, he led a relentless guerrilla campaign against Italian forces in Cyrenaica for nearly 20 years. He became a symbol of defiance, a symbol of resistance, until 1931, when he was captured and executed. But even in death, his legacy lived on. Following his execution, the Italian regime under Benito Mussolini intensified its repression. Entire communities were forced into concentration camps. Tens of thousands died from starvation, diseases, and brutal conditions. At that point, independence felt almost impossible. Then came World War II. Libya became a battlefield. Axis forces, Italy and Germany fought against Allied troops, including the British and Free French. Cities were bombed. Communities were torn apart. When the war ended, Italy's control collapsed. But freedom did not immediately follow. Instead, Libya's future became uncertain, caught once again between global powers. The United Kingdom took control of Tripolitania and Cyrenaica. France occupied Fezzan. Some proposed dividing Libya permanently between these powers. The question was no longer whether Libya would be controlled, but by whom. Some powers wanted to divide Libya. Others pushed for something different through independence. In 1949, history took a decisive turn. The United Nations stepped in. After intense negotiation behind closed doors, a resolution was passed that would change everything, setting Libya on the path to becoming the first African nation to gain independence through the UN process. But independence didn't happen overnight. On December 24, 1951, Libya officially became a sovereign state. It emerged as a kingdom led by King Idris, a figure seen as capable of uniting a deeply divided land. But there was a major problem. Libya was poor, extremely poor. Its economy was fragile, its infrastructure weak, and it had almost no reliable source of income. The country needed something, anything to survive. Then, everything changed. In 1959, just 8 years after independence, Libya struck oil, and not just a little, massive reserves. Overnight, the country's trajectory shifted. Libya transformed from a struggling desert kingdom, dependent on foreign aid and rent from American and British military bases, into a rising oil power. The stakes had changed completely. Western oil companies rushed in, eager to tap into this newfound wealth. With oil revenues flowing, the government suddenly had resources to invest. Infrastructure projects began, development expanded, living conditions started to improve, but progress came with complication. As wealth increased, so did the cost of living, and corruption began to creep in. King Idris struggled to maintain control over rapidly changing nations. Many Libyans grew frustrated with how the country's wealth was being managed. At the same time, his close alignment with Western powers became increasingly unpopular at home. By the late 1960s, dissatisfaction was growing. The king continued to allow foreign companies to dominate Libya's oil sector. His silence during key regional conflicts, especially the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, further weakened his standing among the people. Meanwhile, a powerful wave of Arab nationalism was spreading across the region. In Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser had already inspired a new political direction. Other countries were experiencing their own revolution. And in Libya, a young officer was watching closely. His name, Muammar Gaddafi. In 1963, he joined the military academy. Quietly, he began building a network of loyal officers, men who shared his vision of radical change. For years, he planned. He admired revolutionaries, he believed in Arab unity, and he was determined to free Libya from foreign influences. Then came his moment. September 1969, King Idris was out of the country receiving medical treatment in Turkey. Gaddafi acted. In a single night, the monarchy collapsed. Libya was no longer a kingdom. It became a revolutionary state. Gaddafi immediately rebranded the nation as the Libyan Arab Republic. Later, he introduced his own political ideology through a manifesto known as the Green Book, a system blending elements of socialism, pan-Arabism, and Islamic governance. By 1977, the country took on an even more symbolic name, the Great Socialist People's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, meaning a state governed by the masses. But beyond the ideology, his most impactful move came early. He took control of Libya's oil. Before Gaddafi, foreign corporations dominated the industry. He changed that completely. He expelled Western military bases, renegotiated oil contracts, and when companies resisted, he threatened nationalism. Eventually, they gave in. The result? Libya's oil revenues surged. Within years, the country was transformed. It became one of the wealthiest nations in Africa on a per capita basis. Living standards rose dramatically. Healthcare became free. Education became free. Housing was supported by the state. For many, Libya had entered a new era of prosperity. Gaddafi implemented policies aimed at shielding his people from perceived danger of capitalism. He banned renting homes for profit, asserting that every Libyan had the right to own a home, and prohibited commercial property rentals. Although these policies seemed well-intentioned, it created chaos, housing shortages and hindered real estate development. Yet, Gaddafi's ambitions went beyond domestic affairs. By 1960, he was focused on international influence. He saw himself as a liberator of Africa, aspiring to create a United States of Africa free from Western control. He lavished money and resources on other African leaders to secure their loyalty. This generosity and charisma allowed him to gain influence across the continent. However, his attempts to dominate the mineral-rich Alzo Strip along the disputed border with Chad backfired. Libya's invasion was met with strong resistance from Chad, backed by France after years of harsh desert conflicts. Libya was defeated and forced to withdraw, making humiliation blow to Gaddafi's regional ambitions. By the late 1970s and 1980s, Gaddafi's reputation was increasingly negative. His anti-Western rhetoric and flamboyant lifestyle made him widely disliked in the West. US President Ronald Reagan famously called him a mad dog of the Middle East.
Mad dog of the Middle East?
Relations with the United States deteriorated as Gaddafi allegedly supported Palestinian militants and other terrorist groups, including the IRA. Trade restrictions escalated, culminating in the US bombing of Tripoli and Benghazi in 1986, which killed his adopted daughter. In 1988, Pan-African Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, and Gaddafi was implicated. This led to the international sanction and Libya's growing isolation. Feeling threatened and inspired by Pakistan's nuclear progress, Gaddafi secretly pursued nuclear weapons through the late 1980s and 1990s, acquiring technology from Pakistan's scientist Abd al-Ghani Khan. However, international intelligence intercepted the efforts, and under intense Western pressure, Gaddafi dismantled Libya's nuclear program. In the late 1990s, Libya sought to repair its international image. It handed over suspects in the Panam bombing to authorities and accepted the International Court of Justice ruling on the contested border with Chad. Following this, the UK restored diplomatic relations, and by 2003, UN sanctions were lifted. Libya then collaborated with Western intelligence on counter-terrorism. Western leaders visited Tripoli, and British Prime Minister Tony Blair famously shook hands with Gaddafi in the desert. International oil companies returned, signing lucrative contracts while projecting socialism and simplicity publicly. Gaddafi and his family privately enjoyed luxurious lifestyle with overseas villas, yachts, and art collections. Dissidents faced imprisonment or death, and public execution were common. When the Arab Spring swept through the region in 2011, Libya erupted in protest. Gaddafi responded with brutal force, drawing international attention. The UN intervened, and NATO soon became involved, complicating situations further. In March 2011, the US passed Resolution 1973, giving NATO the authority to intervene in Libya under the official goal of stopping a humanitarian crisis.
We would also run the risk, if we do not act, of turning Libya into an isolated pariah state, where actually Gaddafi would have nothing to lose and would be even more dangerous than before, somewhat like a wounded animal.
The international community acted quickly, wary of repeating past failures in Rwanda and Bosnia.
And we ran the risk that in some months from now we would be repeating the hand-wringing that the international community collectively did after the massacres in Rwanda.
As Gaddafi's forces were advancing on Benghazi and a massacre seemed imminent, the United States coordinated with international partners to build a coalition, secure a mandate to protect civilians, halt the advancing army, enforce a no-fly zone. NATO began bombing Gaddafi's military position, aiding rebels into reclaiming cities, and within months, the regime was visibly weakening. Officially, the mission was humanitarian. UN Security Council Resolution 1970, adopted earlier in March 2011, authorized all necessary measures to protect civilians. President Barack Obama emphasized that the goal was not regime change or occupation, but to prevent a disaster. NATO's mandate was strictly to protect civilian population under threat, grounded in the responsibility to protect R2P doctrine. Given Gaddafi's brutal human rights record and threat against Benghazi, the intervention was framed as a moral obligation. Obama stressed the urgency, noting that every moment mattered as Gaddafi forces neared the city. The world was told this was about saving lives and supporting Libya's democratic aspiration. However, deeper motives were at play. Libya is rich in oil and strategically located, and Gaddafi had long been unpredictable. Internal communication hinted at political and economic incentives behind NATO's intervention. A 2011 memo to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton suggested that France's President Nicolas Sarkozy sought to secure Libyan oil, protect France's interests, and boost his domestic standing. Observers argued that NATO's campaign also aimed to maintain Western influences during the Arab Spring, control access to Libya's resources, and prevent Gaddafi from undermining allied African financial systems. While leaders like Obama, Sarkozy, and David Cameron framed the intervention as a moral necessity, strategic calculations were clearly involved. The Arab League's unusual request for a no-fly zone provided political cover, and Gulf allies such as Qatar and the UAE joined the coalition, signaling regional support for Gaddafi's removal. With many enemies circling, NATO launched heavy airstrikes over Tripoli. On March 19, 2011, Operation Odyssey Dawn began, with French jets destabilizing a loyalist armored column outside Benghazi and halting Gaddafi's advance. In the early stages of the Libya intervention, the United States, France, and Britain took the lead in targeting Libya's air defenses and armored units. Soon after, NATO assumed full command. On March 31, 2011, Operation Unified Protector officially placed NATO in charge of the air campaign and naval blockade, coordinating missions from command centers in Italy. The US took a cautious approach, concerned about another Iraq-style quagmire. The Obama administration supported the operation but avoided leading prolonged conflict. Washington contributed crucial capabilities in the operating phase: cruise missile, electronics, jamming intelligence, drones, and aerial strikes to weaken Gaddafi's forces before handing primary responsibility to NATO allies. Obama described this as aligning American power with an international coalition to avoid bearing the full burden. After the first week, the US role was mostly supportive, with drones and targeted strikes, supplementing the European-led efforts. France and Britain were then visible leaders of the campaign, while NATO coordinated contributions from a total of 18 countries, including Canada, Italy, Belgium, Denmark, Norway, and 3 Arab states, Jordan, Qatar, and the UAE, which provided fighter jets or support aircraft. Over 7 months, NATO flew more than 26,500 sorties, including roughly 9,700 strike missions targeting thousands of installations. Notably, no NATO ground troops were officially deployed. Some countries such as Britain, France, and Qatar did send special forces or advisors to assist rebels, but NATO's strategy relied overwhelmingly on air and naval power. This air-only approach quickly neutralized Gaddafi's air forces and destroyed much of his heavy weaponry, leveling the battlefield for the lightly armed rebels. By August 2011, rebels supported by NATO air cover advanced into Tripoli, leading to the collapse of Gaddafi's regime. On October 20, 2011, Gaddafi was captured in his hometown of Site and brutally killed by rebel forces, an event widely publicized. While the world initially celebrated Libya's liberation, the aftermath revealed severe challenges. With Gaddafi gone, Libya lacked a central government, functioning institution, or a national army. Only numerous armed militia vying for control over territory, resources, and oil. The National Traditional Council (NTC) assumed leadership and resumed oil exports, receiving recognition from NATO and the UN. However, warning signs appeared immediately. NATO had not deployed peacekeeping forces, and victorious rebels remained armed. Dozens of militias controlled different regions, including Tripoli, leaving the new authorities with little ability to enforce order. Violence, score settling, and human rights abuses quickly followed, including reprisals against suspected pro-Gaddafi loyalists and sub-Saharan African migrant workers, many accused of acting as mercenaries. In the years after Gaddafi's fall, Libya descended into chaos. Two rival governments emerged, foreign powers intervened, and the country quickly became a war zone. Russia, Turkey, the UAE, Egypt, and mercenaries all picked sides, turning Libya from a failed state into a full-blown battlefield. Amid the chaos, another crisis unfolded that few discuss. Libya became the epicenter of human trafficking. Migrants from Africa attempting to reach Europe were trapped, and many were sold into slavery. In 2011, CNN released footages showing people being auctioned in Tripoli, yet the world largely moved on. Smuggling networks thrived in the lawlessness. Weapons looted from Gaddafi's arsenal spread across the region, fueling conflicts in Mali, Syria, and beyond. UN reports from 2013 warned that armed flows from Libya were escalating instability. Former Gaddafi fighters, including Traore mercenaries, returned to Mali with heavy weaponry, sparking a northern rebellion that was only halted by France's Operation Survival in 2013. Libyan arms also made their way to militants in Egypt, Sinai, and Gaza. Internally, Libya became a haven for extremist groups. By 2014, organizations like Ansar al-Sharia and ISIS had established foothold amid the disorder. The lack of central authority turned Libya into a proxy battlefield for regional and global powers. The Second Civil War from 2014 to 2020 saw foreign nations directly supporting different factions. Egypt and the UAE backed General Haftar in the east of counter-Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood, while Turkey and Qatar supported Western factions in Tripoli, including Islamist-aligned groups. Russia also intervened, sending Wagner Group mercenaries to assist Haftar, aiming for influence in Libya's oil sector and the Mediterranean. NATO's 2011 intervention indirectly opened the door for this foreign meddling. The Second Civil War from 2014 to 2020 saw foreign nations. By 2020, the conflict had become an international affair. Turkey's military helped defend Tripoli and Haftar's offensives, while Russia continued backing Haftar's forces. Foreign support persisted despite UN armed embargoes, prolonging the crisis and making peace nearly impossible. For ordinary Libyans, the consequences have been devastating. While Gaddafi was a brutal dictator, His removal has left the country fractured, lawless, and rife with violence. NATO may have won the war to oust Gaddafi, but Libya's future has been severely compromised. This raises profound questions about the true meaning and effectiveness of humanitarian intervention.